My name is Era, and I'm the host of the Tamil Creator Podcast. I chat with creators from all over the world to share their stories and discuss hot topics in a way that I hope inspires, educates, and entertains you. I've been working really hard to deliver amazing guests and great content to you. But before we get into this week's episode, I just need your help with two things. Number one, hit that subscribe or follow button on whatever platform you're listening to this podcast on so that you're one of the first to get notified when new episodes drop in the future. Number two, go to thetamilcreator.com to take a 2-minute quiz that will tell you what kind of creator you are. I would love to hear what results you get. Your support means more than you'll ever know. Thank you. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Tamil Creator. I'm your host, and today we have another wonderful guest. Her name is Indira. I butchered her name, but let me try it. Samarasekera. Did I get that right, Indira?
Correct.
Perfect. Awesome. And she is a Tamil Sri Lankan who is the president or was the president at the University of Alberta and currently on the board of directors for a number of major companies, including Magna International, TC Energy, and Stelco. She used to be a director at the Bank of Nova Scotia, and she's an officer of the Order of Canada. And really, I'm excited to kind of talk to her about a book that she recently co-authored or will be coming out soon called Nerve. And it really highlights what her and her co-author, Martha Piper, had in common, which was, they're both female, their willingness to kind of take risks when it comes to leadership opportunities that presented themselves, and about having a really good work ethic as well. And she kind of will talk a bit more about this, but the journey was not easy, it wasn't pretty, and it wasn't fair. But one of the taglines of the book is that's kind of what comes as a result of choosing to answer the call to lead. And in her opinion, that's something that a lot of women still turn away from today. So I'm super excited to chat with her today. Indira, I kind of gave you an intro, but maybe you can tell the listeners a bit more about yourself, your upbringing, and we'll kind of delve from there.
Well, thank you, Ara. And I wish I could see all the audience, but obviously it's a podcast, and I'm just honored to be here. So yes, I'm a Tamil Sri Lankan, and I was actually my early education after a very brief period in the United Kingdom in London when I was about 3 years old was largely in Jaffna. So I would say I'm a true product of growing up in Jaffna, which, as many of you Tamils know, is the heart of the Tamil culture and Tamil population. And what I must say is that I went to 2 schools in Jaffna. One was Chundukuli, which is, again, a school that was, I think, started by the American missionaries, and Vermbady, where I spent about 5 years, started by, again, American missionaries. 2 wonderful schools that really gave me the foundation, I think, to be the person that I eventually became. A school that brought out the best in you. It was a school that had very high standards and enabled me to grow. And when I went to the schools, the funny thing was, having come from London, England, I couldn't speak Tamil at all. All I could speak was Cockney English, and I would get teased by my classmates about my very poor Tamil. And it was a bit traumatic, but anyway, I persevered, and they were helpful, and I eventually learned Tamil. It's my mother tongue, and I was educated entirely in Tamil. I won't go through a lot of the detail about a lot of the other stuff. It's in my biography, but fast forward, I then moved to Colombo and went to another private school, Ladies College, Faculty of Engineering, University of Ceylon, undergraduate degree completed, and then I went to the United States for a master's, and then eventually a PhD at UBC. I was an academic all my career, taught engineering at UBC for 25 years. And then had, this is where Nerve comes in, didn't have very much administrative background, but thanks to a colleague, a female colleague, who sponsored me and nominated me for Vice President Research, I made the big shift into administration and leadership. So 5 years as Vice President Research, 10 years as President, University of Alberta, and then I was able to retire and do something completely different. So I'm now retired 6 years. I'm a corporate director, as you heard, on the board of 4 companies. Most recently joined Intact Financial, which many people would have heard of. And I'm a senior advisor at a law firm, Bennett Jones, and I am a grandmother. So a multitude of tasks. So in a nutshell, that's a little bit about my upbringing.
Yeah, like, I mean, a couple of questions. So I'm a computer engineer by trade, but I'm not an engineer anymore. But one of the things I want to ask you was, as someone that kind of went through engineering program, where I know from experience, the ratio of men to women is, very much skewed towards obviously men. But I think that's slowly changing with kind of a more focus on STEM and things like that. But what was your experience like being a female in an engineering program, which traditionally, was a bit more male centric? Like, what was it? Did you notice anything really different, or like nothing really? Yeah.
Well, it was so I entered engineering in 1969, almost 50 some years ago. And it was the first class that actually had 12 women. The previous years, there were like 1 woman, 2 women, and our year was like bumper crowd, 12 women. And we were called the Dirty Dozen. Anybody who remembers the movie? And it was a wonderful experience. First of all, having 12 women made all the difference. 150, class of 150, so the rest, do the math, were men. At first, they didn't know what to do with us. And so we would go and, like, girls sit in the front row of the lecture hall, and we would get pelted with like little airplanes, paper airplanes. But then, you had to do labs and so on. And the boys were great. They got friendly with us. As you know, the culture in Sri Lanka in the 1960s, boys and girls didn't mix much, right? It wasn't the culture. So we lived in a girls' dormitory and they lived in a boys' dormitory. And so we only met in the classroom. And so it took a while to break the ice. And I remember, I'll tell a story. I went into mechanical engineering, and now I was the only woman in a class of about 60. And, I'd go into the class typically early and find a seat in the front row, very much what young girls or young women do. And nobody would sit near me. I felt like I had the plague, because if any boy sat near me, he got what they call teased in the back, right? So, here I was sitting all by myself, and all the boys were like three seats away behind, like the plague. I was sitting there, and then I thought, how do I deal with this? So I would come late to the class now. I'd come 10 minutes late. I'd walk in, and I'd go sit beside a different guy, and the poor fellow would squirm. And eventually, when we became good friends, they'd all laugh, saying how they were terrified I was going to sit beside one of them. So, you learn to cope. And I have to say, no discrimination, complete acceptance, good friends, well supported, fun experience, and a fantastic engineering degree that compared with the very best in the world. So that was my experience.
And like, I know, like say when I look at my parents or like other folks that are kind of a little bit older, especially that went to school in like Sri Lanka, you guys do a really good job of kind of staying connected wherever you guys are globally. So do you still keep in touch with some of the, the folks that you were friends with or like went to school with back in Sri Lanka, or like how's that?
Absolutely. So we have obviously a little network. It took a few years before it formed, because there was no social media for a long time. I kept in touch with most of the girls in my batch, particularly those who lived in Sri Lanka or went to Australia. My roommate lives in Australia, Shailaja. She was Shailaja Sivadasan. So we've kept in touch. But we had our 50th year reunion in Kandy, Peradeniya, in 2019. That was 50 years. And it was amazing what a large number of them came back for that reunion. And since then, we've had Zoom calls to continue to stay in touch. So a very connected community. And of course, the older you get, you tend to value the connections you had when you were a very young person, because these are people who knew you before you were married, before you had children, before you had a career, and at a time of your life when you were very much able to form deep friendships. So yeah, absolutely, we stay in touch.
Yes, and one of the things I often hear, like, a lot of the narrative around Sri Lanka is obviously the war and kind of the resulting, diaspora communities that formed across the world because of all the Tamils fleeing. But one of the things I often hear is if it wasn't for the war, Sri Lanka could have been what the Silicon Valley of kind of the East with, like you said, very high quality education, like in the schools, a lot of talent and,
Yes.
the potential. And, I think capital is going there now again. But is that something that you kind of agree with that, there's so much talent there that, even like, now that things are slowly kind of opening up, that eventually Sri Lanka could, have more of a Silicon Valley feel, especially in the north. So.
Well, completely. I think I'm very happy that Jaffna is rejuvenating. I mean, they were really hard hit by the war. I have not been to Jaffna since 1970. I want to go back the next time I'm in Sri Lanka because I think and there are Tamils all over the country. It's not just Jaffna, and the Sinhalese population, of course, is crucial. And so there are two things I wanted to sort of say. First of all, when Sri Lanka got independence from the British, Lee Kuan Yew, who became the Prime Minister of Singapore, predicted that Sri Lanka would be the fastest growing, most prosperous country in Southeast Asia because he could see the opportunity. In the meantime, Singapore became the fastest growing, most prosperous country. Okay, so what happened? Lee Kuan Yew decided as a policy that there will be no racial-based discrimination, targets, no race-based policies. And of course, it translated into the Chinese and the Indians and Singaporeans being able to live harmoniously together and create a very prosperous society. Sri Lanka made, in my opinion, a mistake. A mistake by not recognizing that you had a strong minority community living in a majority country, and that there had to be respect for language and religious rights and freedoms, quite apart from the history. And if they had not adopted the policies that they adopted in 1958, my family escaped the race riots with our lives intact. It was a very traumatic experience. Sri Lanka would be a very different country today. Having said that, the tragedy is that the average Sri Lankan, and I mean Sinhalese, my best friends are Sinhalese. I married a Sinhalese. And when I went back as a tourist recently, and we were led by a tour guide, the Sinhalese are delightful people, generous, hospitable, and the average Sinhalese, I don't think, particularly wanted the kind of racial divide that we've resulted in. So if you can get the politicians out of the way and the right leaders in place, I think Sri Lanka has a chance, because you're right. It's a country with an intelligent population, highly literate, hardworking, motivated, open, hospitable, and so on. But they're really going to have to rethink the politics and respect for religion, language, ethnicity. And I'm not talking just about the Sinhalese and the Tamils. I'm talking about the Muslims and all of the other religious groups. So there's a lot of work to do.
Definitely. This episode is sponsored by nobody. That's right, nobody. So if you could be kind enough to hit that subscribe button, that would mean a lot to me. And, I'm starting there. Now, if I want to fast forward, like a question that comes to mind whenever I read your bio is, you're on the board of directors of like these Fortune 100 or 500, whatever you want to call them, companies, or big companies. And you said Intact as well. I guess my number one question is, how do you get that kind of opportunity presented to you? And number two, what is called upon you when you do that kind of role? I've always heard that role, like, in the news, or you hear about it through like interesting people you read, but can you tell us a bit more about that?
So first of all, it's interesting you asked me, how do you get those opportunities? Martha Piper and I published an article today, an op-ed in the Globe and Mail. And we said, it's not about mentors, you need sponsors. And every single board opportunity I have had, and she has had, is because someone out there, a senior person in the community, decided to put our name forward, even though we didn't have business experience. We had leadership experience, but we're not business. I'm an engineer, she's a physical therapist, and we didn't have business experience. But they saw in us the capacity to have critical thinking, to be analytical, to be able to learn, and so on. In my case, I must mention John Maybury because he was the CEO of Dofasco when I had the Dofasco chair in steel processing at UBC. And he nominated me. Then he became the chair of the Bank of Nova Scotia. And it was he who identified me and gave me an opportunity. If he hadn't, it would not have happened. So sponsors are essential. And Canada is a country where there are many generous people, particularly men, but also women, who identify talent and put your name forward. So every board, you need someone to say, oh, there she is. She's got these skills. She may not have business experience, but here's an opportunity where we could take advantage of her knowledge of managing people, a complex organization, or dealing with governments, thinking of strategy, all of that. And it's the same for Martha Piper. She was on the board of BMO. So we both had 2 bank boards. What do they look for? And so I've served on, as you know, Scotiabank, TC Energy, Magna International, now Intact. She served on BMO, TransAlta, Shoppers Drug Mart. So quite a few boards. What are they looking for? Obviously, the biggest thing is they're looking for your judgment, right? You have a fiduciary responsibility and what is called a duty of care to the shareholders and the stakeholders. The Canadian Business Corporation Act says that you have to act in the best interest of the corporation. So that's everything that the corporation is about: employees, customers, people, shareholders, and so on. What does that mean? You have to act with a great deal of integrity. You have to come with an open mind. You have to be prepared to make complex decisions without all the information. You have to learn fast because you're often a director of a company in whose business you don't have the expertise in. So you have to come up to speed on the business. You have to learn fast about the finances of the company, the markets they operate in, the geopolitical factors, the risks that the companies face, the emerging opportunities for competition, customers. You worry about the customers. Are we serving the customers? What about the employees? So it's a very complex, a complex set of issues that you as a director need to be prepared to make a decision on. Obviously, management provides you with the information and the decisions that have to be made. And so you have to hire an outstanding CEO and trust in the CEO and delegate the business of running the company to him. You shouldn't be in there every day asking questions, but your job is oversight and foresight. So you provide oversight for how the business is running, and you provide foresight about what the future might hold. So those are sort of generally speaking. And I think the good news, and we talk about this in our book quite a bit, many women and men ask us, well, how do you get on a board? And so we talk about this in the book, about getting on boards, how hard it is to actually be on a board, how much hard work it is. Getting on board is easy. Actually being on the board is the hard work. And then the things that are happening on boards. Boards of companies now recognize that we need diversity, right? So we need people who come from all kinds of communities, all kinds of backgrounds, and different ethnicities. So this is a great opportunity, I think, for the minority population in Canada. And speaking of Tamils who have done very well in this country, to have opportunities for these boards. But they need to be sponsored by someone who knows them, who thinks that they have outstanding capabilities. They need to connect, therefore, with large numbers of people and networks. And then they need to be, prepared to serve and start with maybe a modest opportunity. I served on a lot of nonprofit boards before I was called to go on a corporate board. So, any opportunity to serve and to learn, I think, is my advice.
So with the board of directors, I mean, like you kind of hinted, it is demanding, but I guess if you were to quantify, like how much time do you have to put in because you serve on multiple boards, and for myself, when I look at outside in, the benefits seem to be number one, credibility, building a network, but is there also do you also get compensated for your time and the energy you have to put into kind of doing this very serious job,
Yes, I mean, it's a very serious job. I mean, depending on the company, you may have 5 meetings a year that go 3 days. But each of those meetings requires a whole load of preparation just for the meeting. But your job is, once you finish the meeting, to say, well, that's done. I don't have to think about Scotiabank until the next meeting. No, your job is every day to read everything you can, to be constantly up to speed. So it is a significant job. Your compensation is mostly in company shares. And so you don't benefit from it while you're on the board. For the first 5 years, you don't take a penny. You're giving your time for not any immediate direct compensation. You're obviously getting shares. And I think the other thing is that the real value is not only what you give, which is the role of a board director, but also what you get in terms of your own education, your own understanding, your own ability to grow as a director. I'm a very different corporate director today than I was when I joined Scotiabank 13 years ago. So it's really a chance to grow and to learn. I would say that given that I'm on 4 boards, I would say close to 80% of my time is focused on board work.
Interesting. That's fascinating. I never thought of that third benefit, which is the learning, because I guess it's similar to if you were like a angel investor, where I guess anything where you put money into, or
Yes.
you're like you said, you don't get the benefit now, but you do have some kind of long-term alignment with or incentive to learn and kind of think in the best interest of the company. Just like if I were to invest in a company, I would, like, for example, if I were to invest in Bitcoin, I only put money into Bitcoin so that I could learn about the opportunities and kind of the technology evolution in Bitcoin. Otherwise, I'd be more of a casual observer. But now I have some kind of incentive, so
Yeah.
that definitely makes sense. Okay.
Yeah, they call it skin in the game.
That's exactly
Right?
the term
You
I
have
was using.
skin in the game. It doesn't, it's not that you do it for the money that you have, but it certainly focuses your attention
Yes,
on ensuring that the company does well.
definitely. One thing I want to touch on was, you went to UBC, and when most people come to Canada, we typically go to one of the major markets, being, Toronto, the big one, Montreal, or like Vancouver. What made you kind of go to Alberta? I think so. It was University of Alberta in Calgary?
Edmonton.
Edmonton. So what made you settle in Edmonton then, in terms of, I guess outside of the opportunity? Why didn't you decide to pursue something in like Toronto or like Montreal or BC?
So, so first of all, University of Alberta is one of the top 5 research universities in the country. So that in and of itself is a great honor and an opportunity. Secondly, these opportunities come up at different times, right? And you have to consider when the opportunity comes up, whether that university is the right one for you and whether you want to do that, because it won't come again. The next time it comes up, you'll be too old. You may not be suitable. University of Alberta, there were many things. A job of a president is also about a fit with the institution and the region. And as you know, I'm an engineer, and Alberta is a very technology-oriented province, largely oil and gas, but it's moving into other areas, and has a very can-do attitude. Alberta is a truly, a province in which people came from around the world, and there's a great deal of risk-taking and entrepreneurship. And I felt that there was an alignment with how I view things as an immigrant to this country, not afraid, back to the title of our book, Nerve, not afraid to take risks, to try new things. And I just felt that the university was a up and coming, rising global university. And given their strengths in the whole area of engineering, that my fit would align. But of course, the university has 18 faculties, everything from nursing to law to business, medicine, engineering, agriculture, arts, and humanities. So it was a job of the entire university. But it's about, the right opportunity, the right time, the right fit. And can you make a difference? You take these jobs because you see some way to contribute to advance the institution. And unless you're excited and passionate about being able to do that, you shouldn't go into the job, because believe me, it's 24/7. for 10 years. And it's tough, it's exhausting, it's challenging, it's energizing, it's exciting, but it's also, a long haul.
You mentioned like the job being 24/7, highly challenging. Obviously, the president of like you said one of the top 5 research schools in Canada. I mean, if you were like off the top of your head, what would you say was like the most difficult challenge you had to deal with, and like how did you kind of overcome that challenge if you were able to? Yeah.
Yes, I mean, again, there are many challenges that I think are in the book, and let me pick one that I think is an interesting one, and that was where the former premier of Alberta passed away. His name was Peter Lougheed, very famous Canadian. He had been absolutely revered across the country and in Alberta for what he did for the province. And when he died, the government of Alberta and his family were interested in a legacy for him at the University of Alberta, because he was a graduate of the University of Alberta, law degree, undergraduate degree. And so the idea that eventually emerged was to create a Peter Lougheed Leadership College to help young people figure out what does it take to be a leader, not just a business leader, but just a leader in so many areas. And to my surprise, there were enough resistance in the university to that idea, because it's not a traditional academic discipline, right? It's not like starting up a department of chemistry or physics. Leadership is kind of one of these things academics said, well, is this really a subject that could be studied? So I got a lot of pushback. And even after I had managed to very fortunately secure the former female Prime Minister of Canada, Prime Minister Kim Campbell, to lead the Peter Lougheed Leadership Initiative in college, we had numerous students and academics and others saying, this doesn't belong here in a university. So that was a significant challenge, because as you can imagine, the reputational consequences of not doing it well. And I think it comes down to back to having the courage to stand up for what you believe in, to articulate why this is important, to hear everybody's point of view, the good and the bad, and say, I've heard your point of view, but here are all the positive reasons why we need to do this and why it's important for the students. First of all, it has to be important for the students. That's what we're doing this for. But then also for the province and the country. This country needs leaders who understand the role of citizenship, understand the role of what's important for Canada. And if we don't make an effort to up our skills in our leadership body, we won't have the kind of leadership we need to advance Canada. So it was a tough period, because everyone wanted to, not everyone. I mean, the other thing you learn is that the silent majority who supports it won't speak up. The noisy opposition will make the noise. And that's the other thing. You have to take the trouble to find out, is this widespread opposition? In which case you really have to stop and say, well, maybe I need to rethink this. Or is it a group of people who have some agenda that prevents them? So that was one of my big challenges. Good news, by the time I left, we managed to start the college. We built the building. And guess what? The students loved it. The students that went to the college benefited from it. Several of them became Rhodes Scholars. And I've not followed it so closely. I think it's very successful. They built the residence hall and so on. So big things like that, you're going to get opposition, and you have to lead with principles and patience.
Did you know that every time you left a 5 out of 5 review for this podcast, a Tamil parent lets their child pursue a career in the creative arts? Okay, that's probably not true, but if there's a chance that it is, do you really want to jinx it? Leave a review. Do it for the young creative in you. Something I'm fascinated by, because you were a leader at a university, is, obviously with COVID and just kind of a general shift that's kind of happening, you're obviously probably closer to it, but how do you see the future of education changing? Like in terms of, you hear a lot of noise around maybe not having a traditional 4-year degree, online schools, or like schools that are like started by the tech companies that are like more bite-sized and more affordable, or like different kinds of models where like students are not paying, $20,000 a year for tuition, but it's like, I forgot which college it was, where it's like they take a percentage of your future earnings. I forgot what it's called. But how do you see the education, like future of education, changing? Do you see like schools like the University of Alberta or like University of Toronto, et cetera, shutting down, or like, downsizing in terms of their footprint? Or is it something that you see more of maybe the secondary kind of locations, maybe like scaling down significantly or even shutting down completely, kind of like what we're seeing in the US? I know it's like a
So,
long question, but yes.
yeah, no, I mean, I think higher education is going to be one of the most important sectors for the future. You think about, knowledge is doubling every week now. And so the amount of knowledge out there is increasing. And how are we going to educate citizens to function in a rapidly changing world is going to be a very high need. So that's not going away. Secondly, I think that the higher education sector is ripe for disruption. The old model, I think, was increasingly under scrutiny. And now with the pandemic, it is definitely going to have to deal with change. It's very clear that students do not need to sit in a lecture hall and listen to a prof, a sage on the stage talk for an hour. They can listen to that in their dorm rooms or somewhere else, and then really come in for the interaction. So I think that the power of universities and higher education institutions is about how do you curate that interaction so that it helps transform a person's ability to think and so on. And, that famous Chinese saying, I read and forget, I hear and listen, and I do and I understand, or something. I mean, there were 3 stages. So the whole notion of doing, right? By doing, you remember much more than if you just listen to a lecture. So experiential learning will become increasingly important. So my view, and then finally, I think, let's not face it, let's not forget it. I mean, students are going through adolescent to adult, a social transformation that has to happen somehow, somewhere, in a community that enables them to think freely and openly and challenge new things without any risk to themselves. And the universities have served that purpose very well for hundreds of years, going back 1,000 years ago when universities were first formed. So University of Alberta and Toronto and UBC are not disappearing anytime soon. If anything, they are going to go stronger, and they are going to have to rethink how they offer education in a way. Does that mean that other models won't emerge? Like you said, tech centers and people having modules and all of that. Of course, because learning is going to become lifelong. And 4-year degrees, I think, are going to be transformed to perhaps an experience that equips you so that you can take many, many courses all your life and select what you're going to do. So it's not the one and done that we all did, did 4-year degree, and most people didn't think about it after that. But given that the university's job is not to impart knowledge as much as to impart skills and capabilities of how to think, to curiosity, to envision, to be able to debate, to be able to write, to all of those kinds of skills, I think that there will be a significant rethink of how we educate the next generation. So I'm very excited and I'm very hopeful. And I'm hopeful because Canada has a very good system of public higher education that provides access. And that's I think the biggest question is we need to provide education for large, for large members of the population, not a select few, because everyone needs to have the skills in order to find the ability to contribute to society in a way that's not only rewarding personally from the standpoint of just your own self-satisfaction, but of course also rewarding financially, so you can have some quality of life. So yeah, it's going to be a very interesting time as to what happens.
I'm glad I got to kind of hear your answer because I'm very fascinated by the future of education just because I often kind of go through my own experience and think, was it worth it or not? But even like as my wife and I, we just had twins like 8 months ago or 9 months ago. And I'm thinking about what will the future of education look by the time they're ready to go to university. And I'm always like, is it worthwhile to get an RSP or, will they be alternative forms of education that they want to do? So I'm always like very curious whenever I have someone like yourself that comes from an educational background or like academic background to hear your thoughts on um, the future of education. So I've kind of heard this from a few other people as well, but it's kind of nice to hear.
But, but,
Yeah.
but let me say one thing. People were talking about the disappearance of bricks and mortar.
Yes.
If there's one thing we learned about the pandemic, is that we really value face-to-face interaction. Zoom doesn't cut it. Online is not going to do it. And I don't care how much the tech pundits talk about everything's going to be online. We're humans, right? We need human interaction. And we don't even understand how our five senses contribute to how we absorb information. And I think that studies, even 10 years down the road are going to reveal that face-to-face interaction is going to be absolutely prime and used effectively, but it's not going to disappear and be substituted by whatever you call it.
Well, I think something you said that really kind of got me was obviously there's the education, like learning how to learn, which is what the schools are supposed to kind of do. But there's also, like you said, that social transformation that's happening with young people where they come in as adolescents and they leave hopefully as adults or young adults that are ready to kind of conquer the world.
Right.
And for me, like from when I entered school to when I finished, it's definitely a very different person, especially
Yes.
when you live away from your parents, like you grow and evolve even faster. So I think definitely that's part of the experience. So
Absolutely.
Now we should kind of get into the meat of it, which is, obviously you and Martha Piper wrote this, sounds like this great book called Nerve. Tell us like why you decided to write this book, how you and Martha came together to kind of co-author it. And what are you hoping to achieve by putting this book and the ideas in that book out there in the world?
So just a quick introduction to how did Martha and I, connect. And so I was her vice president research. It was really uncanny. She had been vice president research at University of Alberta, and she became president of UBC while I was there. And then I became her vice president research, and I became president of University of Alberta. So we went in the two directions. So there was a natural connection, and we are close friends, obviously. Why the book? After we retired, we would have numerous people ask us about leadership, all the challenges. And I'm not talking just about when we led, but everything from, how do you, if you're a younger woman, how do you juggle marriage and children and so on? What is it in about your educational background? I have a daughter who's, 6 years old, you've got twins, what should I be doing with them in order to prepare them to be successful in the future? So these kinds of questions, including, how do we get on corporate boards, all of that sort of stuff. And we sat down and thought long and hard about, how did we get to where we got to? And I think the one thing that finally struck us was the notion of nerve. And this came from a Georgia O'Keeffe quote. Georgia O'Keeffe was a famous American painter. And she decided not to paint like all the artists in France, Monet and all of those people doing that kind of art. She painted this very different art form. And what she said, it takes more than talent. It takes more than hard work. It takes a lot of nerve, right? So you have to be prepared to challenge conventional wisdom and step out and risk in order to make anything happen either in your life or in the lives of people around you. So the notion of nerve became very central to our book. And each of us observed, looking back in our lives, how we had to develop the nerve, in my case, to go into engineering, to leave Sri Lanka and go to the United States, to leave the United States, come to Canada. I mean, all of those things require a level of risk-taking and a willingness to, confront failure. It may not have always worked out. So, and she has similar experiences in her life. I mean, she trained as a physical therapist, and at a very young age, she was asked to become the dean of what was rehabilitation medicine at McGill University with no experience as a leader. And again, she had to step up and find the nerve to do it. So that was really the driving force for the book. We think that we can hopefully empower and inspire women at every stage of their career, girls in high schools, women in lower management positions, young women in business, in academia, in nonprofit associations. So this covers, if you will, all professions. It's not just academia, although there's a lot about the universities in there. And then finally, women who are about to become senior leaders or going on corporate boards. The final chapter of our book is called, so we have three parts, developing nerve. So that's about our education. And I talk about going to school in Jaffna and all that stuff. Leading with nerve. So that's about leading with nerve. And the final one is reinventing yourself with nerve. So when you retire from a leadership job, who are you? You know, people say, you know, what are you doing? And how do you recreate a life of purpose and a life in which now you have the luxury of giving back to society and helping others succeed? You know, what does that look like? So those three parts are the three parts of the book. And what we do in the book is we have like little summaries and then we tell stories. So the book is filled with stories that illustrate various points about the journey. So it's a part memoir and part leadership book. And in each chapter, we have sort of lessons learned. What would we have liked to have known when I was 12 years old, or when I was 30 years old, or when I was 50 years old? What would I have liked to have learned? So we've been trying to impart what did we learn.
Interesting. So it sounds like it's kind of part of, I guess, because you kind of went through these stages of, you know, you were younger, you kind of got the education part, then you became a leader, now you're on a board. Now it's kind of the next evolution of, I guess, your career or life, where you're kind of, I guess, onto the legacy making side of the journey now. So
Right.
I always love asking about legacy, especially as someone that is, I'm a long-term thinker and I like to be forward thinking in terms of, you know, one of my favorite questions to ask people is around the idea of, you know, if you were to ask your friends and family to describe you in, you know, 2 to 3 sentences, like in terms of your legacy, how would you want them to describe you?
So, you know, I always like to think about Winston Churchill's quote, right? You make a life by what you get, right? You make a living by what you get. You make a life by what you give, right? That what you give in the end is really about your legacy, what you leave behind when you're no longer there. If you're lucky enough, people will remember you after you're gone. But more importantly, whether they remember you, what have you done to make the world a better place that outlasts your lifetime? And so for me, I think the thing that has been very, very satisfying is the opportunity I've had to transform the lives of young people. You know, most of my career was students, right? I mean, I spent 20 years teaching, 10 years leading a university. 80,000 students got their degrees while I was president, and I shook at least 60,000 hands and gave them their certificate. Now there I wasn't directly responsible, but I was working on creating a climate where they could succeed. So for me, it's all about giving back in the form of, in my case, helping others succeed has been kind of my, if you will, my purpose in life. And I'd like to think that while I'm far from a perfect human being, often impatient, once things happen fast, I'd like to think that I'm generous of spirit. And so if someone wants my assistance, that I have the capacity to help to the extent that I can, right?
So that's interesting. So it sounds like even like nerve, which is interesting because legacy is also like once you're gone from this earth, like this book and the idea that you're sharing will be part of your legacy because it's kind of hopefully enduring. So I guess thinking forward, I know you wrote this great book, Nerve, and do you have plans to write like other books as well? Or like, yeah, I know you just literally just finished a book and you're like in the, in the marketing phase, if you want to call it that, where you're kind of
Yeah.
getting the word out there. But do you have plans to write other books?
Well,
Or
Martha and I we roll our eyes because we had no idea how much work writing a book is. It sounds easy and it was fun to do, but oh my gosh, when you think about the details of putting a book together, it's a lot of work, right? And so I think what it comes down to first, let's see how many people buy this book and read it, right? Do we have the capacity to move audiences, to inspire people? Is it something they want to hear? So that's, I think, the first test. And then the question is, what else do we have to contribute? And we'll have to reflect on that, but it's a lot of work. And right now, I can't imagine writing another book.
do you have like a success metric or something that you put this book out there, and like, how will you know if you've done a good job, or like you can deem this whole endeavor like a success?
Well, I think, first of all, how many books will get sold. I think the publisher is very concerned about that because obviously it's a business proposition. They're taking the business risk, right? But I think what would be, for me, evidence of success is, how we see the ideas that we've espoused about nerve, about stepping up out of your comfort zone. How do those ideas get embraced by communities? Do they get talked about in little groups? Do they, there's a women's executive network, do people engage in the discussion around what we've put forward, either with us or with others? And that would be a measure of success for us, is to see that level of interest in the ideas, not just the notion of nerve, but all the ideas that are in the book.
Okay, because I'm always curious when I ask other creators, because one of the reasons I started this podcast was I always seem to have pretty good conversations with interesting people, but they're always in private. So I've always wanted a way to kind of share them, and podcasts made that
Right.
possible. And for me, success is kind of like what you said, but I kind of get some direct feedback where I see the number of downloads or listens, but I also see people reach out saying, hey, I really liked your episode with so-and-so. I got
Right.
inspired by their story. So I was just curious what it looked like for you. So that's fascinating. Money can be hard to come by, but here's a $100 opportunity for you. Join my free newsletter for free exclusive content and a free chance to win $100 when I hold special draws. Did I mention that it's free? Another topic I want to kind of delve in with you was, obviously, as a course of a leader of the University of Alberta, you dealt with kind of a lot of money. And I'm fascinated by the topic of money just because I feel like it's very taboo, especially in the Tamil community. Because I see money as simply a tool, nothing more, to kind of live the life that you want to live. And, money means different things to different people. What's your take on money personally? And like, how do you invest? Like, without giving away any like details that you feel uncomfortable, but like, how do you view money, and how do you invest at a general level?
So, I have to say, first of all, money was never very important to me for the longest time. When you go into academia, the pursuit of money is not high on your agenda. Otherwise, you'd go into business or something else. You're much more interested by the notion of having intellectual freedom to pursue your ideas, to do research, to teach, and so on. And, university professors are paid quite well. And so it's a nice kind of, you don't have to worry about it. Let's call it, you didn't have to worry about money. Having said that, now that I'm, retired and on corporate boards, and I see people with significant sums of money, I ask myself, well, so what is the purpose of having money, lots of it? And I would say, for me, what money has now come to represent is freedom, freedom of choice, where you don't have to do what necessarily you don't really enjoy doing. It gives you much greater freedom so that you can do things with your time that you otherwise couldn't do, because you have to use that time to earn enough to pay your bills, right? So it's increasingly, for me, around freedom that allows you to pursue, I think, actions or activities that give you satisfaction and hopefully make a difference for others. And it also has to be, you find the wealthiest people eventually discover that they're not interested in spending it on themselves, right? Whether it's Bill Gates or Warren Buffett, they're not out there buying, a mansion and 500 cars and all the trappings of materialism. And I think often there are cultures that get trapped in the notion that money equals sort of more material goods. And I think the Western world is learning that the greatest happiness comes not from having material goods, but by having the ability to make a difference and contribute in some way. And money helps you make that kind of contribution. So for me, that's what money is about. It's about liberation. It's about making a difference. It's about giving to others. It's about supporting those causes that you really deeply care about.
Super fascinating. What is an insecurity of yours?
Oh, I never feel I'm good enough. I'm constantly, I have no idea. Even last week, I went into a meeting and I just felt, oh gosh, I didn't ask the right questions. I don't think I read the material thoroughly enough. I mean, it's a horrible place to be because people look at me and say, what's the matter with you? You know, you have so much success. But you know, somewhere inside of you, you don't really change in terms of your wiring. And I've always been someone who wants to be better than I was yesterday. And with that wanting to be better comes with constant judging your own performance on everything and saying, well, how can I do better the next time? That may be a good thing. That's an insecurity that I'm not good enough, and that people might think some of the things I say, a little bit off the wall.
In terms of like learning, like from whether it's, I typically look at books or podcasts, but is there a book that you've read or a podcast that you listen to that's really had an impact on you in, like, say, the last 3-5 years?
Yeah, well, I read a lot, as you can tell from my
Yes.
bookcase recently. One of the books that I read recently that absolutely blew me away was a book by a Canadian woman who's currently a professor at MIT. Her name is Sarah Seeger. She won the MacArthur Genius Prize, which is given to very few in the world. She's an astrophysicist, and her research is about looking for something that I had never heard of before called exoplanets. And those are planets that are in the right position relative to a sun, like the Earth, that might have life. So she's busy looking for this. She wrote a book called Smallest Lights in the Universe that has just come out, and it is breathtaking. First, she's a brilliant writer. I mean, it's a book of great literary quality, but it's a memoir, and she talks all about her life struggles as well as her passion for astrophysics and the universe. And it's very powerful. I really have enjoyed that book. It's one of those rare books you pick up and you say, smallest lights in the universe? What's that about? It's a story about passion, hard work, joy, tragedy, triumph, big ideas, all of that. So and she's a Canadian astrophysicist. She was just recently made an officer of the Order of Canada.
Just like yourself.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. And has there been like a new belief, behavior, habit that you've kind of developed with the last couple of years that's like really improved your life as well?
Yes. So I was born a Christian, raised a Christian, lapsed Christian, and rediscovered Christianity. And I have to tell you, it has transformed how I live day to day, but how I see the world. And, Christianity is a religion. Its central tenet is love and forgiveness. Those are the two principles of Christianity. And boy, I look at what's happened with the First Nations communities. I mean, the Catholic Church has a lot to answer for on that front. And I tell people, you can't equate a man-made entity, which is called the church, with the actual religion or the people who practice it. So let me say that outright. But Christianity as a religion that preaches love and forgiveness is so essential right now in terms of our ability to and the ability to say sorry, truly sorry, and rectify the things that we've done wrong is at the heart of Christianity. So I find those concepts very powerful.
Yeah, it's funny you brought that up because my wife was Christian, then I found Christianity through her.
Oh, yeah.
So everything you kind of said exactly resonates where It's really about other-centeredness, not about yourself, but others. So
Yeah, yeah.
I definitely agree with you on that.
And you know, people who have trouble with the Bible, I say read C.S. Lewis's book, Mere Christianity. That was a guy who was an atheist, a brilliant professor who
Yes.
became a Christian. And I mean, for me, that was the book that led to my reconversion.
Yes, I think one of the things people have to like learn to do, and it's hard to do because of, I guess, the media, is really separate people from a concept or an idea, because human beings, at the end of the day, we are fallible. We're not perfect representation. So,
No.
what C.S. Lewis was, probably the greatest Christian thinker before, and I think Ravi Zacharias was, but obviously Ravi seemed to have made some mistakes, but I still separate kind of the work that he did and kind of the awareness that he brought, even though
Right,
he's a fallible human, right? So,
right.
yeah, I love that. In terms of the global Tamil community, and like I'll separate this into two questions. So, who's somebody in the global Tamil community that you admire and why, and who's somebody that isn't Tamil that you admire and why?
So, global Tamil community, I would say right now there are two that come to mind. One's a Tamil and one's a half Tamil. The Tamil is Indra Nui. You know, she grew up in Tamil Nadu and became the CEO of PepsiCo. I find her remarkable as a woman, a Tamil who came to North America and went all the way to the top. The other one's half Tamil, and that's Kamala Harris. Her mother, Gopinath, was a Tamil, and Kamala is half Tamil. And again, she is now the second most so-called powerful person in the world. From a challenging background. She didn't grow up in the lap of luxury or with any kinds of networks. So I think the reason I picked on those two, first of all, they're both women. And secondly, I think that they are absolutely represent the cultural changes that are taking place and how women from these, minority roles are playing a role. And, between you and me, I think Tamils are very smart people, right? You look at half of the, people who are leading companies in the United States, there's a lot of very, very bright Tamils involved there. So I'm a big fan of Tamil ancestry. And you said someone who's not Tamil that I admire. So here I'm going to pick Michael Houghton. You may not have heard of him. Michael Houghton won the Nobel Prize for Medicine this last October for his discovery of the hepatitis C virus. And because of his discovery, millions and millions of people now can live with hepatitis without the very, very damaging consequences, which is largely liver disease and often could be fatal. And the reason I picked Michael is, first of all, he won the Nobel Prize at University of Alberta. So hooray, U of A, a Nobel Prize, the first Nobel Prize in medicine, the second Nobel Prize in medicine for a Canadian university. The last one was 100 years ago. So, I mean, these don't come along every day. Mm-hmm. Michael is also one of these incredibly humble people who is so passionate about making a difference in the world. And is focused on his work. And I just found him and continue to find him such a deep inspiration for him. I mean, think about the virus, the COVID virus, and we had a vaccine in 12 months. It's the Michaels of the world that have enabled us to all be in a position where we might be able to, step out and meet with a friend. So for me, my hero this year, right now, is Michael Houghton.
Love it. What's a piece of advice that you would give to your fellow aspiring Tamil creators out there?
I would say,
other than read your book,
have nerves, step up, be courageous. Also, be spontaneous and link out. In our chapter in the book, we have a chapter called Serendipity. You know, the word serendip came from Sri Lanka, island of Serendip, right?
I didn't know that.
So we have a whole chapter on serendipity, and I would say two things that made a difference to my life. One is others have helped me, right? So I call them sponsors who put me in there. The other is serendipity, and serendipity is where things happen to you, and unexpected, that are so transformative. And most of us don't either recognize those things because our eyes are closed, or we don't allow ourselves to be in places where it might happen. And so you have to be open to things, speak to a stranger on the bus, go to a place where you don't know anybody, party or a gathering, take a trip to a country you may not otherwise go. Don't get out of your comfort zone, right? So if you're a creator, that's what you need to be creative, right? You need to be stimulated by ideas and opportunities that are outside your normal comfort zone and that are unexpected and surprising. So that's my 2 cents.
I really love that advice. That's a great way to kind of segue into a fun game that I call Creator Confessions. Essentially, I'm going to put out a few statements or like quick statements, and I want to get the first answer that comes to mind. Sound
Gosh.
good?
Okay, sounds good.
Favorite Tamil food?
Crab curry.
Something that scares you?
Being alone.
Favorite show that you're watching?
At this point, the Crown. I was watching The Crown.
A place that you're itching to travel to after the pandemic is over?
Maui.
A fellow Tamil creator that you want to give a shout out to?
Shyam Selvadure.
Good choice. Favorite childhood memory?
Being with extended family on the night train to Jaffna, to go to a family beachside place that we had in what was called KKS, north of Jaffna. We used to call it KKS. Kankesature, I think it is.
A pet peeve?
Oh, a pet peeve. People who send me internet links to all kinds of things I have no interest in. On WhatsApp, on email, please, let's develop some internet etiquette, right? People just think you want to watch all this stuff. So I think that's a real big peeve, more than a pet peeve.
I only laugh because I know a few family members that are like that just send stuff like that. So it's funny.
Populate I find it quite, I wouldn't have, think about it, before the internet, would you have mailed your relatives every day a newspaper article that they should read?
Yes.
No.
A person or celebrity that you look up to?
Oh, well, I was always crazy about Robert Redford as a celebrity. Just a good looking guy, I suppose. Person I look up to, I think about someone like Mother Teresa and the work that she did in India, in Calcutta, inspired by that.
If you knew that you were going to die tomorrow, a regret that you would have?
Didn't spend enough time with the people I love or tell them how much I love them.
I was going to ask you age you want to retire, but obviously you're retired, so we're not going to do that one.
Well, I'm not retired, right? I mean,
technically.
Yeah. So I actually want to retire from work by the time I'm 75.
Okay. My definition of retirement kind of was alluded to something you talked about earlier, which is not necessarily not doing work, but essentially having full freedom to do what I want when I want.
Yeah, I got that 6 years ago. Yes.
Yeah. A celebrity whose life you want to experience for one day?
Winston Churchill.
Okay. And finally, a PSA that you want to leave our audience with. So maybe you can tell them, when your book is officially going out or like where they can get a copy.
Oh, so the book will be published on September 14th, 2021. It's available for pre-order on Amazon. There's also an audiobook. So for people who can't be bothered to read, some US company is going to provide the audiobook. So we hope that people will, those who are interested in the whole notion of nerve and how one steps outside one's comfort zone, we hope it will make a difference in their lives.
Wonderful. Well, we want to thank you, Indira, for kind of coming on the podcast. One thing I can say right away is you definitely have a lot of energy. It's easy to kind of see why you were a good leader. I had a blast talking to you. If somebody's kind of listening to this podcast and they loved your story, they want to reach out to you for, mentorship or whatever the case might be, what's the best way for them to reach out to you?
So Indira@ualberta.ca. That's my email address.
Okay, perfect. I'll put that in the show notes.
And listen, Ara, this has been such an enjoyable hour. You are a very good interviewer, and I think your podcast, I can see why people like them, and I've just enjoyed our conversation and your own insights on things. Just great.
Perfect. Thank you for the kind words, and thank you for Indira for kind of coming on the podcast, and to the audience listening, thank you guys for listening, and see you on the next episode.
Thank you. Take good care. Bye.